Thank you, Randall, and the Progressive Forum for hosting this event tonight. And welcome back to all of us from our 3-year hiatus. Who knew way back in 2014 when Randall decided to take a break and put the Progressive Forum on recess? Way back in 2014 when grown-ups still ran the Justice Department, when we could rely generally on the Supreme Court to temper the unconstitutional excesses of our state leaders here in Texas. Remember back in 2014, way back then, when white supremacy was still a political fringe thing? Yeah, well, it's hard to believe that that was just 3 brief years ago. And suddenly, we need a disciplined, organized, progressive group of voices to fix what's wrong. We're so glad the Progressive Forum is back in action and announcing its reinvigorated mission so clearly and unequivocally, so importantly. And here we are with tonight's kickoff event. I met Anthony in 2008. I had been in my job 6 weeks, and it was the 70th anniversary of the ACLU of Texas. We were having a big event in San Antonio. Anthony was to be the keynote speaker. We were giving the Molly Ivins Lifetime Achievement Award to Sissy Farenthold. And Sissy, by the way, was supposed to be here tonight, but on the verge of her 91st birthday, she was overbooked and couldn't be here because she couldn't cancel her other event. So Anthony got up to give his keynote address, and I think he wanted to acknowledge Molly and talk about Molly a little bit, who, by the way, is an alum of the Progressive Forum before she died. So Anthony got up and he told this story about he was in Austin and Molly invited him to a Final Friday party at her house. Now, I don't know if everybody remembers this, but the Final Friday parties had a theme. And you were required to come ready with a song, a poem, some sort of performance to fit the theme. Anthony attended the Final Friday party, never having been there, not knowing this, and got there a bit unprepared. Molly, being Molly, leaned back in her chair and said, in her most faux country Texas voice, "Let's let the little gay Puerto Rican boy from New York City go first." Or at least that's the way Anthony tells the story. And he handled it with all the grace that he has by reciting a soliloquy from Romeo and Juliet. Now, just let me pause here and say he is a Renaissance man. He not only can quote Romeo and Juliet, he can talk authoritatively about 17th century Italian masterpieces, particularly about Caravaggio and his influence on Baroque art. And my personal admiration for him is because of his amazing ability to have metaphors roll off his tongue with no thought, seemingly, at all. If you read this morning's Houston Chronicle, you read where he said all the issues of the ACLU are now right on the front burner and they are at a high boil. I suspect you will hear more of that sort of use of metaphor tonight. He's good at it. But back to Molly. Molly spoke the truth. Anthony is gay. And if he were a Texan, he would have been targeted more than 49 times in the last 2 years by our Texas legislature that kept introducing anti-LGBTQ legislation. We defeated most of it. Molly also said, and she was right, Anthony is a Latino. If he were in Texas, he would have to be questioned by law enforcement on a regular basis. He would be racially profiled. He would be asked to show his papers. And oddly, the law enforcement folks who would be asking him for all of that, they too are subject to penalties if they don't ask for it. And tonight, Anthony's lawyers and the ACLU of Texas lawyers are en route to New Orleans, where tomorrow they will argue in front of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals that this law, SB 4, this hateful anti-immigrant law that our state passed, must be blocked and must be stopped. They'll be there tomorrow. And yes, Anthony is from New York City. And if you believe Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, the root of all American evil starts in the big cities, and most particularly in New York City. So Anthony has some responsibility, I'm sure. And finally, Anthony is a defender of civil liberties. He's as good as they come. And I know from personal experience that too would be a problem for him in Texas. To live here, there would be very few doors open to him in a place run by Greg Abbott, Dan Patrick, and Ken Paxton. The conventional wisdom around my office the morning after the election was that all of America had just awakened to the same political dysfunction that we've been putting up with in Texas for years. And that would be true. Every single civil rights battle that we see across the country has a front line here somewhere in Texas. And we could not have had a wiser, savvier, stouter ally in these fights than Anthony Romero. Anthony took the helm of the ACLU just days before the 9/11 attacks and immediately created the National Security Project at the ACLU in New York. And we needed it to fight off all of the horrors that were wrought by the Patriot Act. During the Obama administration, the ACLU continued its litigation against the National Security Agency, and it launched litigation and advocacy around the U.S. drone program. Under Anthony's leadership, the ACLU has fought and beaten the Trump administration's Muslim ban 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. And we have fought against the attempted ban on transgender service people in our military. He has launched a 50-state initiative to end mass incarceration and the racial injustices that has caused in our country. And just a few weeks ago, the National ACLU lawyers, together with Texas lawyers, worked, and successfully, I might add, to help a 17-year-old asylum seeker have the abortion she wished to have that the Trump administration was going to block. I was saying earlier, Sarah Weddington is here with us tonight, which is such a great joy for all of us to have Sarah. I was saying, 40 years ago, she was on that front line in that very first case, and here we just keep having them in Texas. I don't know what the deal is. And now, here we are after the Jane Doe case. We're now gearing up for a fight with the Justice Department that wants to punish us for having had the gall to beat them in court. So, I am honored to call Anthony Romero my friend and colleague. I am honored to share a trench with him in these really difficult, trying times. And I'm honored to introduce you to him tonight at this great Progressive Forum reunion. Welcome, Anthony.